Well, good morning. I'm Suzanne Hanifin with Acumen Executive Search, and I'm here with my lovely co-host, Tanis Morris.
Good morning.
And I am so excited today to have Cameron Madill here with us because Cameron not only has been a CEO, entrepreneur, growing a business, he gave it all up, took a left turn, and now is doing something so totally different. And I think it's the bravery and taking that challenge and risk that allowed him to do a successful exit with his company and do it creatively with an employee co-op. And Cameron will share with us his journey, but he's writing a book, doing research all around couples and couples in particularly with entrepreneurials. So welcome, Cameron.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So again, big, broad introduction.
Yeah.
Tell us your journey and walk us through what got you where you are today.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a big question. Are we thinking just mostly professional, not from like when I was born? Or?
Oh, sure.
We
You
like
can
to
talk
start
about
from the beginning.
Yes.
Start wherever you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll do a very abbreviated sort of how I got into business. I sort of going through high school and college, I was kind of interested in everything. And that meant as I neared the end of college, and I noticed some people had really good plans. They were like, I'm interning at this place and I'm going to go into, I was down in the Bay Area. I'm going to go into Silicon Valley. I'm going to go to finance on Wall Street. I'm going to get a PhD. I'm going to do whatever. And I just was happily kind of like eating from the buffet of life. And I realized like, oh crap, I need to have some kind of plan because clearly the signals are out there. And I sort of put that together with another, rather basic insight, which was that I never have really liked doing what other people tell me. I don't like to think of myself as like aggressively antisocial or anything, but I just sort of, I don't know, I kind of like to make my own mistakes. And so as I was just kind of casting around, trying on different hats, I just thought, you know what, maybe I'll just start a company and just see what happens. And at least this way, a lot of this came actually because I took 2 years off in the middle of college to play music. So I'd seen most of my friends graduate, and pretty much they all hated work. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the universal. Like whether it was Wall Street or Silicon Valley or working for a nonprofit, they all kind of were grumbling about this new life. And so I just thought, why don't I basically grumble about myself and start my own company? So that was, my dad and I actually started a company back in 2003, and we partnered for about 6 years.
And what was the business?
Yeah, so the business was, this is sort of really where we were at, was sort of web stuff. Like we really didn't, yeah. I mean, I had degrees, undergraduate degrees in history and physics. So I really had zero, and I did this 2-year musical journey I had done. So I just had it was almost embarrassing. I remember at one point I was like, all right, I'm going to figure out a system this weekend for like, you guys would relate to this, to like helping to have people know what to do and when they should get promotions. And then I was like, oh crap, I think this is called HR, but I'd never studied any of this stuff. Yeah. And I literally like Googled HR. Like I was like, I don't know what it is. So yeah, we were kind of doing websites, kind of doing some web software. It was all self-taught. So those were kind of like the years of the early struggle. And I think as far as how I got to here, the 2009, the Great Recession was a deeply formative event in a difficult way, but I do think there was a lot of post-traumatic growth on my and our part of kind of like, okay, excuse me, what did we learn from this? So we were kind of trying to chase two cats at the same time. We were trying to do custom web software and websites. Mm-hmm. And we made more money doing custom web software, but it was, I guess, at the most basic level, I didn't like it. And so I just felt like we need to simplify and focus and just do one thing, even if it's like a commodity, and just figure out how to do that well. So we just stopped doing all software work and we just did websites, which was pretty scary because that was like 60% of our revenue. But I just thought, if the ship's going to sink, I at least want to say I went down being true to myself.
And is this still called PixelSpoke?
Well, it was called SynAttack back then, which is what you name a company when you don't know how to name a company. So, but rest in peace, SynAttack. So yeah, we renamed as PixelSpoke a few years later.
Okay.
And then if I were to hit kind of 3 big bullet points as to how I got to where I am today and where PixelSpoke is today, there were kind of like 3 formative events. So like coming out of the Great Recession, I was just like, I need to stop trying to pretend like I and we are so special, and we need to just figure out how to do like a commodity web design business well. It wasn't very inspiring. It wasn't very exciting. It took a lot of focus and discipline, but it was kind of like, if we can't figure out a foundational thing, we can't figure out how to be special, instead of kind of trying to jump to being special and kind of skipping all those steps. It's kind of like, I know we were talking how we're both musicians. I remember when I first started playing guitar, and people would be like, hey, you need to study this musician. Let's just say like Jimi Hendrix. And I'd be like, I don't want to sound like Jimi Hendrix. And it was only after like really dedicating myself to music that I realized, if anyone ever mistakes me for Jimi Hendrix, I should like fall to my knees and just thank the universe for giving, because that, to be able to emulate someone who's truly a master at their craft is incredibly difficult. And usually that's the first step, obviously towards coming up with a unique individual style. So anyway, that was kind of the goal, was like learn how to kind of emulate business basics. And then the 3 big bullet points were in 2014, if that was right. 2014, we became a certified B Corp. And that community of businesses focused on doing well and doing good in the world was really transformational for us. I felt like we'd really found our people and kind of that appropriate balance of purpose and profit, and that they don't have to be in competition. They can actually be, things that amplify each other. In 2016, we went all in on focusing on credit unions, and that was sort of the second choice of, we were working with all different industries and all different types of clients. And by having that focus and finding an industry that we really loved, I really do believe that kind of finance, well, it's kind of like a boring and wonky topic sometimes. Behind every like big social problem, there's finance, and you'll see credit unions working there. So that was another big step of having a greater focus on our clients so that we could add a lot more value to them. And then the last big step was, at the end of 2019, we converted to an employee cooperative. And that felt like kind of, for me, the end of the journey of what I wanted to be able to do with the company. There was a lot of work to integrate that model. Certainly COVID hit the next year and all the things that happened. But that was kind of the final point where it felt like we really became... or I think of PixelSpoke. I still think of myself as part of it, and I guess I am as an advisor, but I think of it as kind of like my first child. And it's like, at that point, it was like, wow, you guys are ready to go off on your own and and go to college and do great things. So those are the big bullet points.
So that's really interesting. You listed kind of 3 formative steps in your growth, the events. What would you say are the lessons that you learned, or they don't necessarily need to be formative lessons that you learned from those particular events, but if you look back at your journey, what are the biggest takeaways that you feel that you've that have shaped you as a human, as a leader, as a business person?
Yeah. So okay, big question.
I know. I'm sorry.
No, it's great. Maybe I'll start with each of those 3. So I think from B Corp, it was kind of the importance of finding a community where we felt like we mattered and we felt like we could make a contribution. There's this really interesting psychology concept of mattering, which is basically the balance between feeling valued and adding value. And that it's not going to be B Corp for everyone. There's lots of different ways, but I do think we felt like we found a home. We felt like we found our peers, and we felt like we found a place where we received a ton and we wanted to give a lot. And I think that matters a lot for a founder CEO, but it also matters a ton for the company. It's kind of that thinking of companies as kind of growing, evolving things. I think from our credit union journey, I don't know if this is relevant to people out there, but I've always been like a quick thinker, and I love to read. I've had a goal of reading a book a week for decades at this point. And so I always thought, and I took StrengthsFinder, and it said my, strategic is one of my top 5 strengths. So I thought I'm good at strategy, and people would often invite me to be on boards or join planning sessions. But when I really looked at our company's strategy, we didn't have a good strategy. And as I really kind of was willing to look in the mirror, I did this like intensive 2-month journey where I read a dozen books on strategy, took all these notes, had a lot of guidance from my business coach, and what I was ultimately left with the conclusion is there's all this writing out there, but ultimately strategy just equals focus. If you can't describe what you're doing in one sentence in a way that a 5-year-old understands it, I don't think you have a very good strategy. Now, there's a lot more that you hang on top of that, but I think before that, I would often, when people asked what we did, I'd sort of be like, we do I can't even remember, but we do, digital marketing that connects companies and customers through different touch points, and I don't know, on and on and on. And so until we got to the point where we said, we want to build the best websites for credit unions in the world, I don't think we had a good strategy.
Right.
And I think that's hard because as humans, I think we like to do more, but that whole, Jim Collins idea of that the stop doing list is the most important thing that we can do as leaders, I think has a lot of relevance there. And it was really hard for me to, and actually not just for me, for us to shut down a lot of those options. It was really hard to say no to a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And the risk, of course, too, is if you say no to too many things, you might find out there's not enough of a market there, and that can be painful too. Yeah. I think as far as the employee cooperative, it is one of the things like I'm most proud of that I've done and that we've done. And I think I love talking to people about employee ownership because I think it's something that's not very broadly out there in our society. And there's a lot of great options. There's a lot of cool stuff happening in Portland specifically. And I just think as founders, most of us, some people have, I guess you talked about your partner's done a bunch of startups, but most people, like most entrepreneurs, are only going to have one significant company. And so you don't get to just do this a whole bunch. And I think it's really important to look at all the different options. And I think far too many entrepreneurs don't look at employee ownership to have it on the table. And I think far too many entrepreneurs just don't even really think about the end. And it's one of those things that I always like to say, we all leave our company one day, and the only question is it head first or is it feet first? And so I think thinking about a way we can do it on our own terms that we're going to feel great about, whatever that is, means we need to look at all the different options.
And, as a business owner, I've heard of ESOPs. I've heard of employee trust. I don't know really what an employee co-op is.
Cool. Yeah, it's not something that's huge in the U.S. There's probably something like 500 employee cooperatives in the U.S. Basically, if you differentiate between ESOPs, co-ops, and employee trusts, ESOPs are a great option. They have a really great tax benefit for the selling owner, and that's part of why they work really well. And I think they do a lot of great things in the world. But you need to be a pretty large size to do an ESOP. So
could I interject really quickly?
Oh, yeah.
And just say for
Acronym
our guests,
alert.
Yeah,
Acronym
yeah,
alert.
yeah.
Apologies.
Okay. No, it's okay. We all do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you mind explaining what an ESOP is, please?
Yeah, and I'm not the person to do that, but I'll do a real high level.
Just say the name. It's
so,
okay. That's all.
Employee stock option plan. Mm-hmm. So it's basically a really powerful retirement plan for the employees. And then the company is owned by a trust, and the trust governs the company on behalf of the employees.
Thank you. That's all that needs to be said.
All right.
Please.
That's like all I know. So yeah.
Well, perfect.
Yeah. So typically you need to be over $5 million in revenue and $1 million in profit, or EBITDA in technical terms, earnings before interest
taxes.
Yeah. Right. Anyway,
Debt.
whatever that is. So that rules out a lot of the companies in the economy. Mm-hmm. Employee ownership trusts, I also don't know a huge amount, but it's sort of similar to an ESOP, but they're much less expensive. So ESOPs are very expensive to set up. That's why you need that scale. So they kind of have a similar setup to an ESOP, but much less expensive, and I think more flexible in a lot of ways. There's a lot of them in Portland, which is cool. And then employee cooperatives are, the big difference between these other models is they are governed by the employees. So and not every employee necessarily gets to be an owner. You get to set your eligibility requirements. We said 3 years, and then like roughly a 6-month candidate period where you're getting mentored and trained, because there's a lot. They always talk about the rights and the responsibilities of ownership, and then a $10,000 buy-in. Mm. But what it entitles you to is an equal share of whatever profits are available at the end of the year to be distributed. So that means that our CEO, just as much as a junior programmer, if they're all owners, they get the same distribution. So it's a very, in the most literal sense of the term, it's a very progressive approach to distributing profits. It's really powerful if it's done right, because you hear all this talking about how do you create an ownership culture, and you literally create an ownership culture. Wow. The work we've had to do, which was substantial, to have open salaries among the owners. I mean, it's a lot of work, getting a budget approved. But what's cool is we've just created this incredibly deep level of understanding and wisdom and expertise about how the business works and how the business is run by every single person in the company. So anyway, that's
I'm
the
sure
high
that
level.
must be really transformative for the culture of the company. I would be curious to hear how that's sort of played out culturally.
Yeah, I mean, so launching a co-op on January 1st, 2020 is one of those things that it was actually good, because I think if we had waited a year, we might not have had the energy to do it with everything that happened. It was a really, and continues to be a really wonderful, winding and enriching experience. There was a lot of things that we just kind of had to learn along the way, but I think at the core, I think we had a great culture before, but it just went to a whole nother level. And I think on sort of like an embodied level, what I noticed as CEO was I was like the happiest and most, I think, engaged I had been in a long time. And I think the reason was, I think most CEOs have to hold a ton of cognitive dissonance between, here's what ownership, even if you are ownership, here's what ownership wants. Here's maybe what the leadership team wants. Here's what the customers want. Here's what the rank and file employees want. And I think there's a fair degree of masking, of kind of like deception that even in a really good company has to go on. And what I found was that true sense of like, we are all in this together. And I felt really deeply respected for my skills and empowered. But I think without that need for maybe having to kind of put a mask on at times. I don't think I felt that, certainly not all the time, and maybe not most of the time before that. But it really just sort of felt like we were all people doing jobs who were valued for our different skills, versus kind of that kind of us and them that happens a lot between management and the rest of the employees.
And I love that comment. You can leave a company by your head or feet first, head first or feet first.
Yeah.
You chose to leave at a great time, but you also did this huge pivot. So talk about kind of the what went through your head on making these decisions, because it's hard to leave a successful business.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is it wasn't that hard for me. And I think the reason was, it kind of goes back to at some point kind of in my mid-30s, I was like, I can see this story has an ending, right? It's like we know the book has a last page or a last chapter. And I think there certainly are a lot of people who run one company their whole life and stay engaged and vital. But I think I had just also met a lot of people who, my sense, and this is of course a judgment on my part, but my sense was they were kind of trapped. They had built a successful company, they made good money, you feel important, you have a reason to get out of bed. But they weren't deeply fulfilled by it anymore. They weren't getting into that flow state of engagement. They didn't feel like they were really challenging themselves deeply. And at the worst, it can turn into people who are, fairly cynical and misanthropic. So I just thought, and I also just thought I want to do more things in my life than just this company. 20 years of my life, I loved it and continue to love it deeply. But that doesn't mean that I can't do other things. So that wasn't hard, but I do want to give a quick plug for employee ownership, because one of the most important things about employee ownership that people don't get is, in this area, I've seen a lot of people sell their companies and have to show up and say to their entire team, hi, I sold the company, this is the new owner, my email gets shut down at 3 p.m. It's been great working with you all. So back to the sort of self-deception. And I think it works fine for some people, but I also think it's kind of sad and honestly almost traumatic for some people. And one of the cool things about employee ownership is you can separate the ownership transition from the leadership transition. So I had 4 years to say goodbye. And we really spent the first 2 years doing that integration of the co-op model and just surviving COVID and all that craziness. And then I told the board at the end of 2021 that I had another 2 years. And they were a little bit surprised. And then they came around to it. And we spent a year kind of figuring out who we were going to replace me with. And then we spent a full year where the entire company, not just the owners, knew what the succession plan was. So, I really had this long goodbye that was really wonderful and meaningful. And then, by the last quarter, I tried really hard to keep adding value, but it was kind of like my successors had stepped up and they were doing a bunch of my job, and it just felt like a natural transition. So, but should I talk about my transition? Okay, so how I went about that. So since I had all this time, there wasn't like this like one day I'm CEO and owner and next day it's just gone. And I'm like, who am I? And I need to go to therapy and do all this processing. Well, because I think it's a huge life change. And a lot of people kind of sprint right up to the end and they're just exhausted. I, for all of 2023, was working 3 days a week. My successors had been found. And just like I said, increasingly kind of my job responsibilities were getting, handed off. So I had this long list of things I wanted to do next, and it was wackadoodle. It was like a college senior who kind of has no idea what they want to do. But one of the things on the list was an interest in doing couples work. I've been deeply fascinated in it for about a decade. My wife and I are big fans of the Gottman method, for folks who know them. Yeah, Doctors John and Julie Gottman. They've done amazing books. There's a whole Gottman method of therapy and coaching and workshops. And I found that I was allowed to do the trainings, even though I'm not a licensed therapist, and at that point I didn't even have any kind of grad degree credentials. And so I just thought, heck, I'll sign up, and I just loved it. So I kind of found over the course of 2023 that all my energy went towards couples stuff. So I had this long list, but there was only one thing that when I had a free day I would spend doing, and I would just literally read random research books on couples. I was just so enthralled by it. So that was just sort of, it kind of just emerged. And then from that, I picked up a couple projects. I started leading couples workshops, which was a lot of fun. I did a little bit of couples coaching. But then it dawned on me that my wife is an accomplished entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur or ex-entrepreneur. I don't know, whatever I am now. And a couple people sort of commented like, hey, that's so interesting that the two of you guys each juggle your own businesses and are now a 4-year-old kid and your marriage. And you all seem to like each other and be happy. We have our down days like everyone, but like it works overall. And so I realized I've done a lot of like learning and studying of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial personality traits, and now I've done all this work on couples. But what about the two together? I didn't really have any point of view. I didn't have anything I really wanted to say. I was just exploring. But it dawned on me that those two things could intersect. So I started a project to interview 100 couples where one of both of them are business owners. Which I just finished a couple weeks ago, which was a lot of work. I know, it's a lot harder than I thought.
100.
And so now I'm working on a book proposal to turn that into a book. And I've given a couple talks on the topic around what I've developed. And then in a somewhat complementary vein, I'm just about to start a master's in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, which I think actually is really complementary because so much of the couples work out there is kind of focused on distressed couples, not kind of on average or functional couples that want to become high functioning. So that's how I think the pieces are all fitting together in my life right now.
How interesting and fun. That's really, there's so much there. Typically we ask our, guests here to talk about closely held values that they have. And how they infuse those values into the workplace. Yeah. But it sounds like you probably have some closely held values that have, transcended the workplace. So like, do you see some commonalities in some of the work that you're doing now and the work that you did at your organization, like where you have values that you're kind of integrating into that? Yeah. Into those streams?
Yeah, great question. I love talking about values, and I think you're absolutely right that to me, it's all the same, right? Yeah. Except for the sexual intimacy part. But I think literally, I think like I read all this couple stuff and I'm like, this is the same. This happened in this leadership team meeting. This happened in this, retreat. This happened in this meeting where people got tense. I think the underlying relational dynamics are basically all the same. They're the same kind of like systems inside our bodies. So from a value standpoint, So there's this really interesting concept called skill transference, which I really like. It's for people who are in therapy typically, and they're kind of like barking at their partner. They're not doing well, and they're told to listen with empathy. Something typically pretty basic, but it usually is with us in relationships, myself as well, right? So listen with empathy, or just validate what they're saying. Don't give advice. Or say more nice things than mean things, like really basic stuff. And people are like, well, I can't do that. It's not authentic. And then you ask them, you say, okay, well, tell me about this kind of situation at work. You know, if you're one of your direct reports or colleague came to you and said, oh, that presentation went terrible, would you immediately start being like, oh, well, no wonder, like, you're such an idiot, you know, or look at this cover slide. And so we realize as humans, like, oh, like in different domains, we actually are able to use these skills. So I think for me personally, where this is especially relevant is I really think my company forced me to figure out my personal values. I sort of went through this process that I think a lot of entrepreneurs do, where I was being asked to define a mission and define core values for my company, and I didn't know what my personal purpose was. I didn't know what my own core values were. So through a lot of those exercises, we landed on PixelSpoke 6 values, which are certainly all deeply held by me, but there was a lot of contribution from our team as well. And then I think those in turn did transfer quite a bit to my family values that I have with Anna. And our son doesn't really have a voice yet, but he seems to like them. So I guess maybe to your question about transference of values, I think I would just personally say my experience, and I think I guess there's research that supports this, is just thinking about that skill transference piece. So if you figured it out for yourself, then you can take it to work. If you figured it out at work, then it probably applies to yourself. If you figured it out for your relationship, you can apply it to work, or you can apply it to yourself. They're all connected.
And to take that one step further, you can apply it to your children too.
Yeah.
Because again, having a house full of teenage boys, you know, it's important to remember the negotiation skills, the let's have this open, honest conversation.
Practicing not losing your temper at work helps at home.
I mean, yeah, we have a
4-year-old.
We have a 4-year-old, but I agree. Like the whole, I mean, so many of those skills that you're right. It's, at least so far, my experiences with kids, it's exactly the same. And then sometimes I think kids are the best teachers because often, you know, our relationship partner or our work colleagues have a fairly high degree of skill. Even when we think they're unskillful, they're pretty skilled compared to what a 4-year-old might feel like if they 100% want that toy plane and they're not going to yield.
Yeah. And you mentioned community, you know, in your journey and things. And community is really important. And I know you've been an active member of EO.
Yeah.
How did that help, or did it help shape this transition, or was it the growth of your company?
Yeah. So EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, has been just profoundly helpful for me. I first joined a program in 2007, which was called EO Accelerator, which were for businesses between 250,000 and $1 million. And then I joined EO itself, which is $1 million and over in 2014 or something. I don't remember the year. Yeah, I mean, I think for me that sort of idea of getting off the island, I felt very isolated. And back to that idea of masking, I felt like at work I really had to put on a mask. Like, I think sometimes Brene Brown has done a great job of popularizing vulnerability, but I think sometimes it and I think she expresses these nuances, but people don't catch the nuances. And so, you know, I would always tell people, like, you know, okay, so you want your leader to be vulnerable. Do you want to know that they were tossing and turning at 3 a.m., like going through layoff plans in their head because they didn't think they were going to be able to make payroll? Like, no. Like, but you want to know that your CEO, you want a CEO who's doing that kind of stuff. But you don't want them to share all the details with you because you hope they're proactively planning for it and looking around the curve, and that means that you don't have to do that. But I wouldn't want to know that I was on a list that, you know, might get, you know, cut or whatever. So EO, I think, really was profoundly helpful, and then it gave me a place to go with those places where I had sort of deep existential doubts and uncertainties, as well as often capitalizing on the good things. So yeah, I think it guided me every step of the way. I've been in a small group forum of entrepreneurs. We've been together for 8 years, so it's kind of been I guess it's ostensibly business, but it, you know, inevitably for me has meant personal. It's meant family, career transitions, and anything else I'm missing right there.
Absolutely. And you grew your organization, and this podcast is on leadership and hiring. Yeah. And so talk to us about really the approach that you take on building teams. And again, how then did you learn here that you can take outside of your business?
Yeah, I love that you follow the script. This is great. You told me this. We're like all over the place. So what did I learn about building teams? So I think on the leadership level, what what I always broke it down, what we still break it down to on hiring, is like the whole rule of three thing. It's like, is someone a culture fit? Do they have shared core values, and are they excited to live them? Like, we always found that the best hires, which is everyone I think we've hired in the last decade, they show up and they're like, wow, I didn't know a company like this existed. I love these values. These are my values. So that culture fit is critical, but when they're not shared, that's equally damaging. Obviously, the competency piece, can they do the job, and do they have the aptitude to keep improving at it, or at least get there quickly? And then lastly, we talk about story fit. Is there a 3-year trajectory inside the company that's really going to meet their needs and going to meet the company's needs? Because I think that's the basis of like a reasonable win-win relationship. And I always felt like planning beyond 3 years is kind of silly. So those are like the three foundational pieces. I think with leaders, the two other things, there's so many things you can look at, but the two big things I think of is someone who's a coach, so someone who's really excited to inspire and lead people to their optimal performance. And then the flip side of the coin is just as excited to help that person achieve their dreams. And I think that the other thing I look for is just someone who's really intrinsically motivated to have the team win. I think, our current CEO, I always love this in her interview. She's a pretty competitive person, but she talked about how she never cared that much about winning herself. It was the team winning that just lit her up. And I think, in fact, that her, possibly, I can't remember, but so I shouldn't speak for her too much, but I think, at some certain previous jobs, she hadn't really been able to do that. So she had been successful from the employer's standpoint, but she didn't feel like she was able to be successful, was given the tools to help the team to win. And so I just think those are the kinds of people we all want to work for, right? Someone who's going to push us, someone who's going to keep our dreams and needs in mind and help make sure we're moving towards those as well. And then someone who just is intrinsically, motivated to do that job, because I think we all know the jokes about the Peter principle, or, people who end up in management just because it's the next, rung on the ladder, versus people who, really love to do what can be a really hard job.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because I keep thinking this transference, that here are these important things of leadership, and I can apply it really to my marriage and my family too. And to remember that we are whole people. We don't turn on a light and say, now I'm Suzanne at Acumen, now I'm Suzanne mom, wife, whatever.
Yeah, and what we learn on all these different fronts inform us again, like they shape us in powerful ways that we bring to our lives in all areas.
Absolutely.
Well, they should, right?
They should, hopefully.
Yeah, because
we allow them to.
Yeah, and I think most of us, at least I've talked to a lot of people who have experiences though of like, I learned this thing at work and it was really exciting, and then they do it with their, their spouse, and their spouse is like, don't, whatever me.
Yeah.
So I think, the context is different, but I do think we should. I mean, to me, that's a great definition of thriving, right? We should be growing in all of these areas, and we should be learning and curious about how it applies, and then kind of what the modification is if it doesn't. I mean, my 4-year-old as well, right? Things that work really well between me and Anna, my wife, he doesn't always like so much either, right? So.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's okay.
Exactly.
Yep.
So looking back, again, growing this organization, leaving by choice, starting something new, what advice would you have given your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, that's always a fun question, because as I mentioned, I'm starting this positive psychology program, so I'm doing all this psychology reading right now, and I've always enjoyed doing that. One answer is I just think it was just my journey. Like, I had a lot to learn, and every step along the way, I learned new things from all the mistakes and adversity I encountered.
And I'm going to throw this in because, again, listening, it's inspiring, but there's also a fear element to walk away from this comfort, this known, to do totally something else. That takes a lot. I mean, again, and maybe I'm more fear-based than you are, but to me, that's a scary proposition to just go for it.
I think it was long-range planning, Suzanne. I thought I was going to do this I intended to do this for close to a decade. So I really, I don't know that I had a lot of fear
You were ready.
I think I was just ready. I think I just had I think I've always tended to really like long range thinking. So I think I probably confronted it along the way. And I mean, I had moments. I did have a really funny moment right as we were signing the paperwork to sell the company. I had this like automatic thought in my brain that popped up, and it was like, they're trying to take the company from me. And then I was like, wait a minute, this was my idea. like these are like the such like wonderful, ethical, values driven people. But there certainly were moments of letting go. But I also think, I guess this is, for most founders, I think they feel, 20 years is a long time. Most people don't stay in jobs for more than a few years now. So
part of it might be that many people, their business or their identity as a business leader can be what defines them.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe it's more that, it's like, if I'm not the CEO of this company, who am I? It's interesting that you left and kind of have gotten into psychology.
Yeah.
maybe you're answering that, there might be something kind of interesting to explore there. But I think maybe that's the fear for many people. Or, you hear about people that sell their company or go through a massive exit, and then they have this like existentialist doubt or a crisis of like identity.
I think they call it like exit postpartum depression, something like that.
Yeah, like what am I doing if I'm not building this or striving? Even like at the Olympics, right? We're recording in August, and the Olympics are currently underway. And I think Simone Biles posted yesterday, people need to stop asking gold medalists what next.
What's next?
But it's kind of that same thing. So, but I guess if you have to kind of existentially confront the idea of like what's next, who am I? That can be a hard thing.
Yeah, and I think so. Again, this was the benefit of separating the ownership transition from the leadership. So I had that moment of like they're trying to take the company, and then it was like that's ridiculous. This was my idea. And, and that was in 2019, right? That's like old news for me. I've had years to process that. And so I think I just had so much time versus I do think the entrepreneurs who really struggle with it have the like sale where they are working their tail off and they're doing financial things and like covertly at night. They have a small trusted circle of people doing things, and then they announce to the whole company and they leave. Their emails turned off the same day. So I just think I had a lot more time to manage that process. And I did have some bittersweet moments. I'm also lucky that I still get to lead the quarterly strategic planning, and I do monthly coaching with the new CEO and president. So I just feel like I have this really warm connection with all of them. They invited me on their retreat this year. Wasn't that nice?
That is very nice.
So I don't know. I just feel like it was a way to maintain that relationship without the rupture that I think often ends up happening. But you're absolutely right that our professional identities are where we derive so much meaning, just like people who retire. And I think to lose that can be hard for a lot of people. And I think without something that you're pulled towards, I think it is a recipe for depression and unhappiness.
Interesting. So with all of the bulk of this experience and, these life lessons and, successes and opportunities to learn and grow, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
All right, you're not letting me out of that. I know I didn't answer before. You didn't like my generic answer. Okay,
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So advice to my 20-year-old self. I think this is what everyone has to learn, and probably in life and in business, but that the bigger the failure, the bigger the opportunity. I'm not really a fan of the like fail fast just for the sake of failure, or and failure can have real significant human consequences. But at the end of the day, I think entrepreneurs are defined by the ability to find opportunity in challenge. So I think that's some advice I'd give to myself. It's kind of cliched, but I think just take a breath. Everything is better if we can remember to breathe, and that there is so much that is going to happen to us in our lives that's outside of our control. But if we can just take a breath and come back to the present moment and make sure to not miss all the wonderful, I love this notion from Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist monk who passed away recently, but an incredible thinker. And he talks about how the ocean of suffering is immense, but don't forget to turn around and look at the shore. And I think that's probably the other thing I would say. If there were, so many failures and painful moments and setbacks, but there's always wonderful things, that we can just derive a moment of pleasure or enjoyment from if we're willing to open our eyes and pay attention.
That's beautiful. So this podcast is called Hiring for Good. And usually we end on the question, what does hiring for good mean for you?
Yeah. I really believe that we all have that kind of right fit job out there. I think sometimes it's oversold that there's that perfect job that we're going to be in a flow state every day and spring out of bed, raring to go. But I think that's where that story fit piece is so important. We do a modified version of LinkedIn's tour of duty, which we call a journey of transformation. Our first core value is enjoy the journey. So that was kind of the connection. It sounds more fun than tour of duty. And so every year we sort of say, what's in a really compelling 1-year journey for you at PixelSpoke? And so I think that whole idea of, I want to be able to see 3 of those if we're going to hire you, because that's where all the magic happens at work, where people just feel lit up, they feel like they're making a big contribution, they feel like they're getting a lot in return. And I think that takes more work. I think we really have to really understand who someone is, where they come from, not just the things they're saying to us they want, but looking at the patterns and underneath it for like, what do we think they really want? And that's what I think hiring for good is all about. I mean, the research is really clear. We get more meaning out of any work than anything else in our lives, right? It's the greatest source of positivity, enjoyment overall. And so it's like, that's just sitting there to be unlocked. And to me, that's what hiring for good looks like, is unlocking that for someone as they join our organization.
Holy cow, you really couldn't end any better. That is a beautiful quote.
So, Cameron, before we leave, name of the book, the title.
Oh gosh, well, there's 2 titles I'm toying with. One is The Business of Us, which is the name of a podcast I started with Jamie Bourne, who's a very talented therapist in Arizona who focuses on entrepreneurs. And the other one is The Entrepreneurial Relationship Handbook. So we'll see.
Ooh, I like them both.
Okay.
Probably it'll be something else anyway, whenever the editor says.
So we need to keep track of that. And boy, Cameron, thank you so much again for coming here, sharing your story, and really your learnings. There's a lot to take away, and a lot for me again.
Absolutely. No,
Thank you guys for sharing. What a cool venue. You've got drum kit and guitar. This is the most fun podcast I've ever done by far.
Well, we can't take all the credits.
Well, you selected it, so yeah.
Page Street Studios.
Yeah.
There we
Page
go.
Street Studios.
Yeah.
Love these guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today at Hiring for Good. If you were inspired by our conversation, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you want to learn more about our executive search services, check us out at www.hiringforgood.net or our company website, Acumen Executive Search.
Thanks so much, and don't forget to join us next time for another in-depth conversation about transformational leadership. Until then, have fun.